Right. All right. So, hey, everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. And today we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and take a look at what's happening over in Bangkok,
Okay.
one of the sort of mega cities of Southeast Asia. And, always a really interesting place to watch in terms of how it's developing. So, we've
Yeah.
got a whole collection of stuff here about the BTS, the Bangkok Mass Transit System,
Okay. Yeah.
and how all of these expansions that they're doing and that are planned are, really sort of anticipated to like totally reshape the property market. And,
Mm.
this is not just for people who are in real estate or investors or whatever. I mean, this is like if you're just thinking about living in Bangkok or visiting Bangkok or, whatever. I think this is going to be really interesting stuff for you because it's going to give you a really clear picture of like what's happening on the ground there.
Right.
And we're not going to like bore you with a bunch of like really detailed research papers and all that kind of stuff, but we've kind of pulled all that together
Yeah.
and we're going to give you the highlights
Yeah.
and the key things that you really need to know.
Yeah.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Mm.
We want to understand, what is the impact that all of these BTS extensions are having on property in Bangkok?
Yeah.
And just to kind of give you a little teaser right up front, one of the things that we've seen kind of over and over again in cities all over the world is that when you have these kind of new transit lines being built, it kind of creates these new arteries of accessibility,
Mm-hmm.
and it can take an area that might have been kind of like off the beaten path or
Yeah.
kind of overlooked,
Yeah.
and suddenly it becomes like super desirable.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So that's kind of one of the big things that we're seeing here. So let's kind of unpack this a little bit and let's talk about, how does this increased accessibility, what does that actually mean for property values?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that you'll find is it's actually a fairly straightforward relationship. As soon as a new BTS line opens or they extend an existing one, it basically just like immediately makes those areas that it connects to so much better connected to everything else.
Right.
It's easier for you to get to work. It's easier for you to go shopping, to go out to eat, get to the entertainment districts.
Right.
And it's just easier to kind of navigate the city in general.
Right.
So that increased convenience that just leads to more demand for housing in those areas.
Makes sense.
And when you have more people who want to live somewhere,
Yeah.
you get more competition for the available properties.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is what pushes those prices up.
Right. Yeah. And we're seeing that already in a number of areas, but
Yeah.
one of the things that was highlighted in the research that we did was this Purple Line extension. So what's the story there?
Yeah, so the Purple Line extension, that's a really big one, and that's supposed to be finished by 2026.
Okay.
And it's going to add 17 new stations.
Right.
And it's really going to have a huge impact on those suburban areas that are kind of west of the city center.
Okay.
So if you think about it right now, if you live in one of those areas and you want to get to downtown, it's like a long drive. It's probably traffic.
Yeah.
It's a bane.
Right.
But once this Purple Line extension is finished, you're going to be able to just hop on the train and zoom right into the center of the city.
Wow.
So that's going to make a huge difference for people who live out there.
Yeah, so it really changes the calculus of like, how far away from the center do I really want to be?
Exactly.
Because it's no longer like an hour and a half commute in traffic every day.
Right, exactly.
It could be, 20 minutes on a train.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, especially if you really value your time and you want to avoid all that traffic,
Yeah,
that's a big selling point.
totally.
So I think we're going to see a lot of people who are maybe priced out of the city center starting to look at those areas a little bit more seriously.
Yeah. And the other thing that's happening, of course, is that Bangkok's population is growing.
Right.
I mean, it's already a huge city,
Huge, yeah.
but it's getting even bigger. So last year in 2024, the metro area hit over 11 million residents.
Wow.
So that's a lot of people, and it's still growing.
Yeah.
So you've got all these people who are moving into the city.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are coming in for jobs. They're looking for, better opportunities, and they're
Mhm.
looking for a better quality of life. And so they're going to need places to live.
Exactly.
And a lot of those people are those younger, kind of professionals, millennials, students,
Yeah.
that kind of demographic.
Right.
And they're the ones who are really drawn to that convenience of living near a transit line.
Yeah, they want that like urban lifestyle. They
Yeah.
want to be able to get around easily.
Totally. Yeah, it's all about, being able to walk out your door and hop on a train and go wherever you want. So let's think about this from an investment perspective.
Mm.
So if you're thinking about buying property in Bangkok,
Okay.
what are the prospects for buying near one of these BTS expansion lines?
Well, I think the long-term potential is really strong.
Okay.
Bangkok is continuing to grow.
Hmm.
The government is investing a lot of money in infrastructure, especially in these mass transit projects.
Hmm.
And so you've got this combination of factors. You've got the continued urban development. You've got a growing population. You've got increasing demand for that kind of connected lifestyle.
Right.
So I think it's a really solid foundation for sustained property value appreciation in those areas.
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen that in other cities around the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you look historically at cities that have made these kinds of investments in transportation infrastructure,
Yeah.
you almost always see a pretty strong correlation with rising property values over time.
Right.
So it's not a guarantee, but it's definitely a good bet.
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of talked about why this is happening. Let's get into some specifics about where.
So, if somebody is thinking about maybe moving to Bangkok or investing in property there,
Right.
what are some of the specific areas that they should be looking at?
Okay. So one area that's really interesting right now is Western Bangkok.
Okay.
The MRT and the BTS are really improving access to that part of the city.
Okay.
And so we're seeing a lot more development happening in areas like Bang Khae and Tailing Chan.
Okay.
And it's not just like, basic housing.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a lot of demand for luxury homes in these areas now, too.
Interesting.
And a big part of that is because of the Purple Line extension that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Those 17 new stations are really going to make a huge difference for that whole western part of the city.
Yeah, it's going to bring it so much closer to the center.
Exactly.
What about further out? Like, what about those kind of, emerging suburban hotspots?
Yeah. I think those are really interesting, too, because as the BTS and the MRT extend further out.
Those areas that might have felt really far away before are starting to become much more appealing.
Right.
And again, connectivity is key here.
Mm-hmm.
So the Red Line suburban rail system, that's a big one because it connects the north and the south of the city.
Right.
And it has this major interchange at Bang Sue Central Station.
Okay.
And so that makes those longer commutes much more manageable.
Yeah. It's not so daunting anymore.
Right,
To
exactly.
think about living that far out.
Yeah. And so that's going to increase the desirability of those areas. And of course, the property values are going to go up as well.
So it's not just about being close to the center anymore.
No, it's not.
It's about being connected.
Exactly.
And even the central business district is seeing an impact from all of this, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, even in the CBD, they're building new lines and extensions to make it even easier to get around.
Okay.
So the Gray Line is a big project that's in the works. And that one's going to connect the middle Sukhumvit area to Raman X and Lat Freo.
Okay.
So those are all major commercial hubs.
Yeah.
And so that's going to make it even easier for people to get to those areas.
Right.
Now, the Gray Line has been delayed a little bit,
Okay.
but it's still moving forward, and it's going to have a big impact when it's finally finished.
Yeah. And I mean, Sukhumvit is already such a popular area.
It is, yeah.
And so any improvement in access to that area is probably going to be good for property values there.
Right, exactly. And especially in places like Thonglor, where the existing BTS station is already a major draw.
Yeah.
So anything that makes it even easier to get to those areas is going to be seen as a positive thing by investors and residents.
So this is really a citywide transformation that's happening.
It is, yeah.
I mean, it's not just one or two lines that they're building.
That's right.
It's a whole network.
It's a whole network. And I think the government deserves a lot of credit for this.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah.
They're making these huge financial commitments to expanding the BTS and the MRT.
Yeah.
And that's sending a really strong signal to developers and to potential buyers
Right.
that they're serious about this.
Yeah. It's a long-term commitment,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just a one-off project.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because they're also thinking about affordability, which is really important.
It is, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Bangkok could be a really expensive city to live in,
Right.
especially if you're trying to buy a place.
Yeah.
So the government has actually introduced a number of different initiatives to try to encourage the development of more affordable housing.
Okay.
So, for example, they've reduced some of the fees that are associated with mortgage registration and property transfers.
Okay.
They've also allocated a lot of funding to build low-cost homes, so houses and condominiums.
Mm-hmm.
And their goal is to build 1 million of these low-cost homes.
Wow. That's ambitious.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a huge undertaking, but I think it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, that would make a big difference for a lot of people.
It would, yeah.
And they're also trying to incentivize developers to build in these areas.
Right. Yeah, so they're offering tax incentives to developers who build near these BTS lines.
Okay.
So that might include things like reducing property taxes or giving them exemptions on the cost of construction materials.
Okay.
And so the goal there is to make these projects more financially viable
Right.
so that developers are more likely to invest in them.
Okay, so they're kind of doing a lot of things to try to make this happen.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, so what are we seeing in terms of actual trends in property investment around these future BTS expansions?
So one trend that's really interesting is the shift towards suburban living.
Okay.
So as we've talked about, the improved commute times are making people more willing to live further out from the city center.
Right.
And so we're seeing a lot of interest in areas that are going to be connected by these new lines.
Mm-hmm.
So the Orange Line, for example, is expected to open in 2025.
Okay.
And that's going to have a big impact on areas like Ramkhamhaeng.
Okay.
So, if you're looking for more space or a different kind of lifestyle, you might want to consider one of these areas that's a little bit further out, but still well connected.
Right. Yeah, it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about international investors? Are they looking at these opportunities as well?
They are, yeah.
Okay.
Bangkok is becoming a real regional economic hub.
Mm-hmm.
It's attracting a lot of expatriates, international workers.
Right.
And so they're starting to show more and more interest in properties that are located along these new BTS lines,
Okay.
and especially properties that are near international schools and business districts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so the potential for capital appreciation and for rental income is really attractive to these international buyers.
Right. Yeah. So if you're thinking about buying a property to rent out, what's the outlook in these well-connected areas?
Well, generally, properties near BTS stations are seeing higher rental yields.
Okay.
And that's because it's just so convenient for people to be able to get around. If you can walk out your door and hop on a train and get to work or to school or to wherever you need to go,
Yeah.
that's a big selling point for renters.
Right.
And so landlords are able to charge higher rents for those properties.
Yeah. It's all about supply and demand.
Exactly.
So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity here.
There is, yeah.
But are there any challenges that people should be aware of?
Yeah, it's important to be realistic and to understand that there are always risks involved in any investment.
Right.
So one thing that's a concern right now is rising interest rates,
Okay.
because that makes it more expensive to borrow money.
Right.
Another factor is the level of household debt in Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people already have a lot of debt.
Yeah.
So that might limit their ability to take on a mortgage.
Right.
And then finally, it's always important to be aware of the possibility of a supply glut.
Okay.
So in some areas, there might be more properties available than there are buyers.
Right.
And that can obviously put downward pressure on prices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's not just a guaranteed win.
No, it's not.
You have to do your research.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So the information that we have also touches on the luxury property market.
Okay.
How does the BTS expansion factor into that?
Yeah, so the luxury market is a little bit different.
Okay.
It has its own kind of dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But Bangkok is definitely becoming more and more attractive to high net worth individuals,
Okay.
especially from Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And so the government has been doing things to encourage foreign investment in that sector.
Okay.
So they've approved longer leaseholds for foreigners. They've increased the foreign condo ownership quota.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that is helping to fuel demand in that high-end market.
Right.
And while proximity to a BTS line might not be the most important factor for a luxury buyer,
Right.
it's still something that can add to the overall appeal of a property.
Yeah. Convenience is a luxury in itself.
Exactly.
So let's kind of circle back to this idea of the connection between transportation and property values. Can you give us a concrete example of that?
Sure. So the information highlights how much land prices have increased in Western Bangkok, and that's directly linked to the growing demand for properties in areas with good public transport access.
Yeah.
And so that just shows you how much buyers are willing to pay for that convenience.
Yeah, they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And I think the reduction in commute times is a huge factor there.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to spend hours stuck in traffic every day.
Yeah, it's not just about the money, it's about your quality of life too.
Exactly.
And then we see this playing out in places like Sukhumvit as well.
Right. Yeah. So COVID is a great example of how resilient a well-connected area can be in the rental market.
Okay.
It's always been a popular area with expatriates because it has great infrastructure,
Yeah.
a lot of amenities, and of course, it's really well connected by the BTS and the MRT.
Right.
And so even though the economy has had its ups and downs, rental prices in Sukhumvit have generally continued to rise.
Okay.
And a big part of that is because there are so many multinational companies in that area.
Yeah.
And they're always bringing in new employees.
Right.
And those employees need places to live.
Right.
So there's this constant demand for rental properties in Sukhumvit.
Yeah. So it's a pretty safe bet for investors.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so looking ahead, what kind of development do we expect to see along these new BTS lines?
So we're definitely going to see a lot of growth in areas that are being connected by these new lines.
Mm-hmm.
So the pink line, for example, is going to open up the area around Minburi.
Okay.
And then the orange line we talked about, that's going to have a big impact on Ramkhamhaeng.
Yeah.
And we're also going to see more mixed-use developments popping up near these stations.
Okay.
So that means, residential, commercial, even green spaces, all kind of integrated together.
Yeah, so it's kind of like creating these little self-contained mini cities
Exactly.
around these transit hubs.
And those are really appealing to younger generations
Right.
who want that convenience and walkability.
And what about the existing communities in these areas?
Yeah, so I think the new BTS lines can really transform these communities.
Okay.
They can bring in more shops, restaurants, healthcare facilities, educational opportunities.
Right.
And so it's not just about the new residents who are moving in. It's also about the people who are already living there.
Yeah, it can really revitalize a neighborhood.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up, for people who are thinking about investing in property in Bangkok,
Right.
what are the key market predictions?
So the general expectation is that property values are going to continue to rise,
Okay.
especially in those areas that are near the new BTS lines.
Right.
And then if you're looking at the longer term, the outlook is very positive.
Okay.
Bangkok is continuing to grow. The tourism sector is recovering. Foreign investment is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of those factors are going to contribute to a strong property market.
Right.
For example, Krungsri Research, they're predicting that the housing market in the Bangkok metropolitan region is going to strengthen.
Okay.
They're expecting annual increases in sales and in the launch of new units.
Okay.
And a lot of those new units are going to be high-rise projects along these new metro lines.
Yeah, makes sense.
And you're also going to see developers incorporating more modern amenities into their projects.
Okay. Like what kind of things?
So things like clean energy solutions, for example.
Okay.
That's becoming more and more important to buyers.
Right. People are thinking about sustainability.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So any final words of advice for potential buyers?
Yeah, absolutely. So location, location, location.
Okay.
That's always the most important thing.
Right.
So make sure you're buying a property that's close to an existing or a planned BTS or MRT station.
Okay.
If you're thinking about renting out your property, do your research and find an area with strong rental demand.
Mm-hmm.
You might even want to look at areas that are popular with tourists.
Okay.
And then finally, make sure you do your due diligence.
Right.
Work with reputable agents, lawyers, make sure the property title is clear. All of that important stuff.
Yeah, don't cut corners.
Exactly.
All right. Well, this has been really fascinating. I mean, I think it's amazing to see how the expansion of the BTS is not just about transportation. It's really reshaping the entire city.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's creating new opportunities. It's transforming neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really exciting time to be in Bangkok.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example of how strategic infrastructure investment can really be a catalyst for urban development and economic growth.
Absolutely.
So as Bangkok's transit network continues to evolve, it's going to be really interesting to see what other changes we see.
Yeah.
Where are people going to choose to live? How are these new communities going to develop?
Right.
I mean, it's kind of an exciting time.
It is. Yeah.
Lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Bangkok property market.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.